Hi everyone, I'm Natasha from Buttonnose Crochet and welcome to the Mirage Temperature Blanket video tutorial. Now, this blanket consists of 12 16 by 16 inch blocks that measure the highs and lows of each day of the year. Another option for this pattern is an 8-inch block that measures either the highs or lows for each month, and if you join these together they'll make about a baby size blanket. Now the stitch that's used in this pattern is, I think it's called the interlocking block stitch. So basically you're working two rows below every time that you work this stitch, and it creates a really nice fabric, and the bigger the hook the more drape it will have. So once you've completed the first couple of rows of this pattern, it's good to check if your work is a bit tight, and if it is, you will need to go up a hook size. Just that little tip will help you, so that way you're not making a stiff blanket, so to speak. Now, with temperature blankets, they can be quite daunting because of the fact that they're a year-long project. And a lot of people haven't got the time to be updating a blanket every single day. That's why the blocks come in handy, because they're very quick to make. Even though the blocks are quite big, you can do them over probably a course of say 3 or 4 days. The littler ones you can do on a weekend. So the little ones are great for if you're working full-time and you're time poor for your updating your temperature blanket. Just do it at the end of the month on a weekend. And honestly, with a temperature blanket, yes, it's good to be up to date, but there's really no pressure. You could be working on a temperature blanket from 3 years ago still, and honestly, no judging, because I still have a couple too. So for this pattern, each 16-inch block will use around about 300 meters of yarn. So it's very difficult to estimate how much yarn of each color you're going to have, because it all depends on your temperature increments that you choose. So for this block here, I have chosen 20 colors, and they're in 2-degree increments. From 0 degrees, which is minus 1.5 degrees Celsius is our lowest in winter, all the way up to 37. So around about 37 to 39 is our highest. And I just broke that down. You can have 3-degree increments, 4-degree increments, but the higher the increment, the more your colors will blend. So for the sample for the video, I'm using some Stylecraft special DK in some rainbow colors. But as you can see here, because I'm limited with the colors that I have, what I've done 4-degree increments up until 28 degrees Celsius, and then I jumped in 2-degree increments, just so that way I could get up to 35 degrees Celsius. Of course, it, like I said, all depends on how many colors you have. So if you're only limited to say 10 colors, you may only be able to do 4-degree increments. It all depends on the temperature range in your area. So in Australia, we have the Bureau of Meteorology, and we get our daily temperatures on the website. And if you're in Australia, simply just search up daily weather observations for your town, and this should come up. And then, yeah, basically I just follow the highs and lows of what they've recorded, and just with whatever colors allocated to that temperature, I do the row for that. Now, if you have purchased the PDF, which has UK and US terms, you'll see your temperature record sheet. Now this is perfect for writing down your lows and highs each day, so if you get behind, that's perfectly fine. And then just use some colouring pencils to colour in the square that corresponds to that colour. That's what I've done with a temperature blanket for the low temperatures for this year. So yeah, so basically choosing colours, there's no pressure to use 20 colours. You can choose as minimum as 10, but your temperature increments will be bigger. So I'm not sure about Fahrenheit because we don't measure in Fahrenheit in Australia, but with Celsius, I'm in a semi-arid environment, so I'm 3 hours west off the east coast of Australia, and yeah, so basically we have really hot summers and our winters are very frosty and cold with the westerly winds coming from Antarctica. So that is our kind of environment. We don't get snow. I think the last time the area had snow was when my daughter was born, which was 16 years ago, and that was up in the mountains 60 kilometers away. I can tell you now that was a very cold time. But yeah, so if you've only got 10 or 12 colors, try and break it down so that way it covers your temperature range. So find your lowest low for the year and your highest high and work in between those two numbers. And you may need to do a bit of juggling, switching around, making sure that your colors are in the right order. But other than that, trust your instinct. If your instinct says that color does not belong to that temperature range, change it. That is how I have found with any of my temperature blankets that I've made. I find anything above 24 degrees yellow can correspond to it. But anything below, honestly, anything below 24 degrees Celsius does not feel like it's a yellow. It's always like a green because it's beautiful weather. But anyway, let's get started. To start, we need a 4.5mm hook if you're using DK weight yarn. If you're using worsted weight, obviously your square is going to be a lot bigger. But I would say use a 5.5mm because you want that little bit of drape, because if you use a 5mm with worsted weight yarn, it's going to be stiff. And then obviously we need scissors and needle to sew in ends if you're going to do that. Oh, and another thing with this border is what we do at the end, we slip stitch up the side of the block, and you have the option of doing a double border by working underneath these loops here, or the border that I've done, which is basically you slip stitch and I just sewed my ends in, and sewing ends in takes a lot less time. So yeah, so basically yeah, so you have those two border options as well, and I don't mind this option because the simple fact that at least then you know which one's the front and back of the square. There's no right or wrong side for the square, because the fact that it all depends which side you like better for the border to be made on. I like the maximum temperatures to be showcasing, so to speak. So yeah, so let's get started, and we will start the Mirage Temperature square. And I hope I have explained a little bit of the temperature blanket concept. And if not, be free to ask questions here or on the blog or on my Instagram or Facebook, and I'll be happy to answer you as soon as I can. So yeah, so let's get started on our Mirage Temperature blanket. I'm just going to make a small one and just do the minimums and maximums for the first 15 days of January this year, 2023. Okay, to start, we need to make a slip knot on our hook. So to make a slip knot, have the yarn tail in the front, wrap around your finger, hold with your thumb, pull the back loop over, wrap around again, back loop over, and then put your hook in. So what we want to start off with, because we're making the smaller square, each square is a multiple of 4 plus 1. So smallest square we need to chain 33. So I'll come back to you when I've got 33 chain. Okay, so I've got 33 chain, and let's get started on our row 1. Now the row 1 and row 2 can be the minimum color for day 1, or it can be the border color for row 1, and row 2 can start as minimum. Okay, so to start the square, we need to single crochet into the second loop from the hook. Now I go under both loops so that way I can have a nice neat finish, and then we just single crochet in each chain to the end. So going under the loop like that gives you the bottom of a nice neat finish. So pause the video and I'll meet you once we finish our single crochet, and you will have 32 for the small and 64 for the large. So for the large you need to chain 65 and single crochet into second chain from the hook and single crochet to the end. So pause the video and I'll meet you back at the end of row 1. Okay, so I've completed row 1, and as you can see it's a nice neat finish working under that loop. So yeah, so that's round 1 at row 1. Now I'm going to be doing the minimum color for the round at row 2. And then we'll continue on from there with our temperature range from low to high, low to high. So to start row 2 we need to chain 1 and turn, and we need to single crochet into that first stitch, so that's our first stitch, which was the last one of the previous row. Chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet into the next 2 stitches, chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet into the next 2 stitches, and we just repeat that until we have 3 stitches remaining. So pause the video and repeat: chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet to the next 2 stitches, all the way to the end where we have 3 stitches remaining. So pause the video and I'll meet you at the end of row 1. Okay, so I'm at the end where I've got 3 stitches remaining. So to finish off row 2 we need to chain 2, skip 2 stitches, and then single crochet into that last stitch. Now if you're doing the maximum for the next row, it's good to change colors here. So my maximum color is going to be pink. And what I like to do when I change colors, I actually like to draw both colors through the loop to finish off the stitch. So for a single crochet we've pulled up a loop in the first color, and then we're changing color as we finish the stitch. And that's how I like to do my color changes. It just gives it a bit more extra strength, so to speak, of it wanting to pop out, so to speak, at the end of before you sew in your ends. Okay, so let's go on to row 3 which will be our maximum temperatures. Okay, to start row 3, we want to chain 1 and turn our work. Just snip off the first colour, so that way you're not getting tangled up. And this is how I like to do my colours. So I've pulled the pink through and I just pull those colours tight, and that just helps knot them up a little bit. Okay, so for row 3 we single crochet into that first stitch, so the single crochet, and then what we are going to do from here on out, we're working 2 rows below. So we're working into the skip stitches of the previous row. So what we want to do is double crochet into the next 2 skip stitches 2 rows below, over the chain. So we're working over the chain. Now the first few rows can look a little bit wonky, but it does even out. Chain 2, double crochet into the next 2 stitches 2 rows below, over the chain. Chain 2, so this is our repeat. Chain 2, double crochet into the 2 stitches, so we skip these 2 and we double crochet into the skip stitches over the chain space. Now this is a good time to check if your tension is too tight. If it's showing that there's not much give in it, I would recommend going up at least half a hook size, just to give your blanket squares a bit of drape. So pause the video and repeat. Chain 2, skip 2, double crochet into the next 2 stitches 2 rows below, so the skip stitches, and what will happen is you'll finish in the last 2 skip stitches before the single crochet. So pause the video and I'll meet you at the end of row 3. Okay, so I'm at the end of row 3 and I've only got the 1 stitch remaining. So your piece should start looking a bit like this, where their stitches are starting to interlock. So to finish off row 3, we just single crochet into the last stitch and changing colours as we finish that stitch. So my next day, for the 2nd of January, the same minimum temperature. It's always good to keep your colour guide next to you, so that way when you're checking off the colours, you can make sure that you're getting the right colour for your row. So let's go on to row 4, and this will be day 2 minimum temperature. Obviously if you're only doing minimums and maximums, it will be day 3. So let's go on to row 4. Okay, to start row 4, we just chain 1, turn, single crochet into that first stitch. Just snip off your other colour. I like to wait until I've got my first stitch done before I snip it off. Next we want to chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet into the next 2 stitches 2 rows below. So they're the skip stitches from the previous row, over the chain. So we always work over that chain and into the skip stitches 2 rows below. Chain 2, so this is our repeat. Chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet into the next 2 stitches 2 rows below, always working over that chain space. So once you get the hang of this pattern, it's very easy to make. The repeat's very easy. So pause the video and I'll meet you at the end of row 4, and we'll have 3 stitches remaining. So pause the video and I'll meet you once you've done the double crochet into the 2 skip stitches before we finish off the row. Okay, so I'm at the end and I've double crocheted into my skip stitches 2 rows below. Now we need to chain 2, skip 2 stitches, single crochet into that last stitch, changing colours as we go. So day 2 high is the same as day 1, and that is row 4 completed. Now row 4 and 5 will be repeated for the block, so take note, row 4 repeat is a single crochet, chain 2 to start the row, and the chain and row 5 repeat is the same as row 3, which is single crochet, 2 double crochet to start the row. So pause the video and we'll come back at row 5. Okay, to start row 5 we need to chain 1 and turn, single crochet into that first stitch, just pull our colours tight, cut off the other colour, and then what we want to do to start row 5 is double crochet into the skip stitches, so 2 double crochet, 2 rows below, chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet into the skip stitches 2 rows below, over the chain space, and we just repeat that. So chain 2, skip 2 stitches, double crochet in the 2 stitches 2 rows below, and just repeat that to the end and you'll have only 1 stitch remaining. And so pause the video and I'll meet you at the end of the row. Okay, so I'm at the end of the row, done my repeat, and as you can see our maximum column and our minimum column are starting to form, and yeah, give our little nice little effect. So to finish row 5 we just single crochet into that last stitch, changing colour. Now day 3 minimum is a different green, and that is row 5 completed. Now we want to repeat rows 4 and 5. For the little block you'll repeat until you've got 31 rows, which is day 30, and day 31 will be your last row. For the bigger block you will go to row 62, so that would be row 30 I think, and sorry, row 31 low, so you'll go up until day 31 low. Obviously the months that don't have 31 days you just fill in the extra rows until where the block finishes with the border color. That's how the blocks will work. So yeah, repeat rows 4 and 5, finishing on a row 4 repeat at row 30, 31 and 62. So yeah, so row 31 for the smaller square, and row 62, which is a row 5, row 4 repeat, yeah, so basically we just continue on and make sure that you have 31 or 62 rows before we continue on. Okay, so I have finished 15 days of temperatures. So this is row 31 on the 8x8 block. So I'm going to show you how to finish off the 8x8 block first, and then I'm just going to do an extra row to show you how to finish off the 16x16 block. So let's go on. So row 32, the last row of the 8x8 block, I've changed to the border colour just so you can see. So just untangle this. So to start row 32 for the 8x8 block, chain 1 and turn. Then we want to single crochet into that first stitch. Just cut that pink off. And then we want to single crochet into the next 2 stitches. So this is how we finish off the block for the 8x8. Double crochet into the skip stitches 2 rows below. Double crochet into the next 2, single crochet into the next 2 stitches. Double crochet into the next 2 stitches 2 rows below. And that will be your repeat. Double crochet in the 2 stitches in the stitches 2 rows below, single crochet in the next 2 stitches, and you repeat that to the end and you'll have 1 stitch remaining. So pause the video and I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so I'm at the end. So to finish off row 32 for the small block, you just single crochet into that last stitch. Now if it's a 31-day month, this will be the high or low temp for this row. So and then next will be the border, but that you would make around. But first I want to show you how to finish off the 16x16 inch block. It has 64 rows, so the last 2 rows will either be the maximum temperature for for day 31, or the row 63 can be maximum, and then row 64 can be the border color if you wish. So let's go on to the how to finish off the 16x16 inch block. Okay, for the 16x16 inch block, for the purposes of the video, I have done an extra row just to show you. So you'll be finishing on, say, day 31 minimum if it's a 31-day month. Otherwise this will be the border color, and it'll be a row 4 repeat, so you'll have the single crochet skip 2. So let's go on to row 63, where we'll even it out like the last row, but then row 64 is just a row of single crochet. It's just so that way you have 64 stitches across the top and bottom and 64 stitches down the sides. So let's go on to, say, row 63, and I've changed to the maximum color. So what we do is chain 1 and turn, single crochet into the first stitch, just cut that, and then what we want to do is double crochet into the next 2 stitches in the skip stitches 2 rows below, single crochet into the next 2 stitches, and then double crochet into the next 2 stitches 2 rows below, and that's our repeat for this row. Single crochet in the next 2, double crochet in the next two rows below. So pause the video and I'll meet you at the end. Okay, I'm at the end of the row. So to finish off the row, you just single crochet into the last stitch. Now I'm going to be doing the next row in the same color. So your last row for the 16 by 16 inch block should look like this. So let's go on to what will be row 64, and then we will go on to the border for both, because the border is the same for both blocks other than stitch counts. That's the only difference. Okay, so what will be row 64? We just chain 1 and turn. You can have this row as your border color if you wish. Single crochet into the first stitch, and then single crochet into each stitch across to the end. So pause the video and I'll meet you back up so that we can start the border. Okay, so I finished the last row. That would be row 64 for the 16 by 16 inch block. Also too, while making this, I thought, well, why not make an 8 by 16 block so you can do the highs and lows. You can get quite creative with this pattern. So you can do 15 days of a block, and I think that works out to be about 25 blocks for 8 by 8s, which would equal to a 5 by 5 blanket, so 40 by 40 inch blanket, perfect for baby size. Or you can do a 8 by 16. I worked it out. An 8 by 16, it'd be 48 inches in length and 32 inches in width, without the border. So that's another option to be able to do it. So you just mix the 8 inch and 16 inch pattern. So you follow the 8 inch in width, but you follow the 16 inch block to how to finish off, and then obviously your stitch count will be totally different. So that's another option for this pattern. If you want to do the highs and lows but not have such a big blanket in width, you can do 4 blocks of 8 inch wide, joined together, and 3 rows, and that will give you a good lap size blanket. Otherwise you can do your 8 by 8 inch blocks or your 16 by 16 inch blocks. So let's go on to the border. Okay, so I've just ripped it back so it's an 8 by 8 inch block, and what I've done, I've gone through and decided that the low temperature side will be the back side of my blanket, and simply just what I do is get your 2 yarn ends from your colour that change and just double knot it, and then you just sew it in. So I always double knot, and get my needle, I put it underneath the second loop of that single crochet, and then underneath the double crochet loops for this side. For the other side, I normally go through the single crochet and then underneath the double crochet. So that's how I do my sewing in. Okay, so let's start the border. For the border, we'll be starting, so this is the right side that I've chosen. We'll be starting in the bottom left hand corner. So obviously for left handers it'll be right handed, because you're going to be working it so that way the edge of your blanket is going to be on your hook hand, and then you work along the bottom, and then we will slip stitch up the side, and then we'll slip stitch across the top, and then we'll slip stitch back down the side to the start, and yeah, and then we'll start doing the few rounds that we need to do for the actual border. So let's get started, and remember, pick a side that you want as the right side of your blanket, because what we're going to do now is, I'll show you with this big one. So with slip stitching around, we create like a little bumpy edge on the back, and obviously with the black you can't see it, but there is a ridge. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but there is a ridge there from when I slip stitch through, and that way you know that that's the back. And like I said, with an envelope border, you'll be able to crochet underneath these loops when you want to do the second side. So we're going to be working the slip stitch on the front first, and then if you're doing an envelope border, you work under these loops, or you can slip stitch around again and work as the same as the front. So let's get started on the border. Okay, to slip stitch around the edge, we need to go up a hook size, so either go to a 5.5mm hook or a 6mm hook. If you tend to be a bit tight with your stitching, I'd recommend going up to a 6. So these slip stitches need to be made loosely so we can work under the 2 loops that are made on the top. So I've marked the base of the first stitch, so that's where we start. This stitch marker here is actually the actual stitch of row 1. So stitch in that stitch with the stitch marker, make a slip stitch, and then it may be a bit tight to start with, but you're going to have to push your hook through. I find that when I do single crochet rows like this, when I start my thing, I can either have it loose or tight. So I'll just come back when I actually get the hook into the stitch. Yeah, finally got my hook into the stitch, and then just make a slip stitch. Pull it through. A bit fiddly this row, but I'll get there. Slip stitch, and then we just slip stitch into each stitch along the edge. So just pause the video and I'll meet you back when I get to the last stitch. Okay, so I've slip stitched along the bottom edge, and if you're having a bit of trouble like I was, I just went back down to my 4.5mm hook and just made sure that I made my slip stitches loose. Now make sure you put a stitch marker into that first slip stitch, because the first slip stitch on each side will have a stitch marker, and they will mark out our corners. So to start working down the side, work into where row 2, the top of row 1, where the row 2 goes into. So that's our first slip stitch. So we'll get our stitch marker and put it in there. And then we want to slip stitch into every row down the side. So pause the video and I'll meet you when we get to the top corner. Okay, so I've slip stitched down the side, and we'll just put a stitch marker into our next slip stitch when we start the top. Just make sure our ends are out of the way. So put a stitch marker in the first slip stitch on the top. So just repeat this all the way around. So we'll go across the top, and then when we go to slip stitch into the pink row here, we'll put, sorry, into the second row here, we'll just put a stitch marker and work our way back down to the start. So pause the video and I'll meet you back at the start of the slip stitching, so that way we can start round 1. Okay, so I'm back at the start, and when I finish off with the slip stitching to the first slip stitch, do a backward slip stitch. So insert your hook from the back of your work through to the front, get your loop onto the hook, and then make sure it's tight on the hook, and then pull through, and that eliminates adding an extra slip stitch that looks like a slip stitch, but it's not. Okay, so let's go on to round 1 of the border. Okay, to start round 1 of the border, chain 1, and then we want to make 3 single crochet into that same slip stitch that you slip stitched into underneath both loops, making sure that you use the same hook size as you did for your block. Place a stitch marker into the second single crochet of that increase, because that is where our corners will be for the next row, next round. And then we want to make single crochet underneath the both loops of the slip stitch. Now before you start this, I should have mentioned, make sure you have 31 slip stitches between each stitch marker. So the first slip stitch after the stitch marker, or say, yeah, so you got to have 31 slip stitches between each stitch marker, so the stitch markers mark the 32nd. So that's what we do, just single crochet, making sure that between each stitch marker, when you make your 3 single crochet in each corner, you have the same amount of single crochet each side. So that's what we'll do for this round. So single crochet under both loops of the slip stitch to the next stitch marker, 3 single crochet in the stitch with the stitch marker. Repeat that around, and making sure that you got an even amount of stitches all the way around, making sure you get the same amount of stitches between each stitch marker. So if you've had 31 slip stitch, that means you should have around 33 for your single crochet. The 34th is your stitch with the stitch marker. So that's per side. So now you'll be increasing to 34 per side, which includes the stitch with the stitch marker. From stitch marker to stitch before the stitch marker is 34 stitches each side. So pause the video and I'll meet you back around at the start, and just remember 3 single crochet into the corners with your stitch markers. Okay, so I finished round 1 of the border and slip stitch to the first single crochet. Now working the top here, if your last row and your slip stitch are the same colour, it can be a little difficult, so just take your time when you're doing that. So now is the time to double check you have 33 or 65 single crochet between each stitch marker, because if you don't, you may need to do a little bit of fixing on the next row. So to start row 2, we're going to slip stitch to the stitch with the stitch marker, and this will be our corner. So I'm just going to put the stitch marker into that first stitch, so that way I know where my last stitch is going to be. So chain 1, half double crochet, chain 2, half double crochet into the same stitch, and then half double crochet into each stitch to the next stitch marker. So just pause the video and I'll meet you at the next stitch marker. Okay, so I've worked to the stitch marker and made half double crochet, chain 2, half double crochet into the stitch with the stitch marker, and you can move the stitch marker up into the chain space if you want. Now this is a perfect example. I was actually 1 stitch less on the bottom, so I just added an extra stitch in to fix up my stitch so I can have 35 stitches from corner to corner. So if you need to do that, it's just subtle, but it needs to be done so that way every square can be joined properly. Okay, so you just continue that around, making sure that you have either 35 stitches between each chain 2 space on the small square, or 67 stitches between the chain 2 spaces on the big square. And so we'll just repeat that, half double crochet into each stitch to the next stitch marker, half double crochet, chain 2, half double crochet into the stitch with the stitch marker. Now if you're doing an envelope border, I would suggest doing only a chain 1 for the simple fact that you don't want to have too much of an opening on the corner. So repeat that around and you'll finish with a half double crochet into that stitch that the first stitch that you slip stitched out of. So pause the video and I'll meet you back at the start of the round. Okay, so I'm back at the start of the round and I've slip stitched to the first half double crochet, and make sure that you got 65 stitches between each, so 35 or 67 stitches between each chain 2 space. Now the next round is optional, so you can either leave it how it is and slip stitch your squares together or sew them together, or you can slip stitch to the corner. In the first square you'll have around a single crochet, but then the following squares you'll actually use the join as you go method. I won't be showing it because obviously I don't have a second square to join onto, but basically when you're doing join as you go, you pull the loop through the top of the stitch on the opposite square, do your stitch, and then pull the loop through the next one. So that's how you do the join as you go. I actually find it the most secure. So that is the tutorial for the Mirage Temperature blanket, and like I said, like this pattern can be use your imagination basically. So if you only want the little square and you want the minimums and maximums, do 15 days a square, and then join them together and be baby blanket size, or you can do an 8" by 16", so that way you can make one a little bit bigger. Do 8 by 8" to make a really small like a stroller sized blanket, or you can do that 16 by 16" squares and they will make a really nice lap blanket size. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed making your little temperature square. And obviously this doesn't have to be for temperature blankets. You can use your scrap yarn and just get imaginative with your stitch placements. So say one row will be cool colors, one row will be hot colors, and you'll still have the same effect as what the temperature blanket has. And obviously you can use any color combinations. So with my 2023 blanket, I'm using browns, oranges, reds and purples, and the really hot days I'm getting reds and purples through, and the cool, like the minimums, I'm getting the really light oranges, so it's a good contrast. I haven't got it with me at the moment, but it's a really good contrast. I'll post a picture of it in the next coming days. So yeah, so thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.